In this video, we are going to extract most of the logic from within the text input into the base input component, which will later on be used as a mixin for all other input types. So first thing we are going to do is create a new file directly under the inputs directory, and it's going to be called BaseInput.view. And here we're going to start with the script again, export default. And before we do anything else, let's open our text.view. We are going to cut all these imports and move them to this base input. Let's paste them in, but obviously the path is going to be slightly different because we are one directory up. So let's remove one of those directories. So now these imports are all good. Now let's cut all these mixins, components, and props together with the data. We cut it out from a text and paste it inside of this export default segment. If we scroll down, we also going to cut those computed properties. So let's get this over to the base input, as all these elements will be shared except for this input listeners. So this one I'm going to move back to the text. So let's create this computed here. And let's keep this one within the text file. Let's quickly import this as well. So import, and we're going to import base input from, we go one directory up, and now let's add it as a mixin. Base input, there we go. And the next thing, we also need to add data to the text file. So data, which will only return type of the input. So return, and it's going to be type. By default, it's going to be text because that's the type of the input that we have for this specific component. So now if we scroll up, and now rather than having type as text, we are going to set it dynamically. So type property. This way, when we later will be extending this text component, but with any other input types, we will only have to specify different data type, say number, date, and so on, in order to use the same template and only have very slim components for other input types. Okay, so that's this. We also need to copy some methods. So we're going to get this emit, we're going to get initialize, we're going to get register listeners as well. We keep reset and clear within this text file. Let's go back to the base input and let's add methods. And let's paste them in. We will also add the fallback for reset and clear. So reset and clear. And here we're just going to log the message to the console log saying that the given input doesn't have implementation of these methods. So please provide reset method implementation for, and let's give it the name of the input, so name, and let's copy all this to the clear method. Now let's change this reset with clear, and we're done. Okay, another thing, if we go back to the text, this watcher needs to be moved to the base input as well. So after the methods, we just paste this watcher. Now if we scroll down, one other thing that I want to add to this base input is two new properties, which will be listen. It's going to be of the type string, and it will be optional, so required set to false. And the other one is going to be fire as well, type string, and required set to false. Both of these will represent event names that we want to either listen to or fire with each keystroke. So fire is the one that we're going to use within the base input, and listen will be used with some other input type. So we're not going to be providing an implementation for actually listening to this property, to the event with the name of this property within the base input, but it will be used with other input types. So for the fire, what we're going to do is, first of all, if we scroll down to our emit method, what I want to do is every time we emit input out of this component, I want to also call the method this emit fire event, and we're going to pass the value to it. And let's create this method straight away. So after the emit, emit fire event value as argument. And here we're going to check if this fire, if there is value associated with this fire property, then event bus, we are going to fire event with this name. So this fire, and passing the value as the second argument. Okay, so that's our fire event. Another thing for the emit method specifically, we have value and we have input, but some other input types may emit different type than an input. So what we are going to do here is create a second argument to this method. We add event, and by default, we are going to set it to input. So this time we are going to use this argument rather than the actual text input. And this way we will be able to obviously specify if there's anything else than input for the event type. So we are now ready to create some new input types. Under the input directory, let's create the first one. It's going to be email.view, and again script, and it's going to import text from current directory text, and now export default. And the only thing we need to do is to add our mixin here. So we're using this text mixin, and then data, it's going to return object with the type set to email. And this will render the input with the type set to email. Now I'm going to create a few more inputs, and I'll pause this video and I'll get back to you once I'm done. Now I've added a few more inputs. As you can see, we have date, we have date time, we have email, we have hidden, we have number, we have the password, we have time, and then I've registered them as components. So we have date input, date time input, and so on. So all these inputs that I've created are now valid view components available to us within the view. Okay, another thing that I want to add is open our wrapper, and sometimes we will have data which is being represented in the form of an array. For instance, if we're going to have address, we may have address property with each item representing, let's say, first line, second line, town, postcode, and so on, being represented as an item of the array. In order for us to be able to work this way, we need to actually pass a new property to our wrapper, which will then set these properties straight away on our fields data property. And this is because array items or object items cannot be dynamically registered on the component. So in order to do this, let's just add new item called collections. This property will be of the type object, and default, because it's an object, we need to actually return it. We're going to return an empty object, so return and the object literal. And then what we're going to do here for the fields, because if we specify them to start with, let's say address, which will be of the type object, an empty object to start with, then we also need to make sure that it's registered on the field so we can actually use it as an index within the view. I'll show you in just a moment how it's going to work. So I'm going to use a spread operator here to assign object type property in between a curly brackets, 3 dots, and then this collection. So whatever has been passed through as a property. Okay, now we can save and close this and all other files. So I'm just going to close it. Let's recompile all the assets. npm run dev. And if we go back to the editor, I've now also updated our view. I've added this collections property with the address, which will be of the object type. I've then updated the input, text input for the first name, for the last name, and then I've added as well for the email. You can see email input. We have one for password input, and we also have 4 other fields, text inputs for the address. As you can see, address and then the line, because the address is going to be representing the object, and because we cannot set the property of the non-existing object dynamically, that's why we had to have this collections property added to the form wrapper to declare it up front. Okay, let's preview everything in the browser, and if we refresh, you can see all these fields are here. If I submit, validation works. If I just preview everything in view console, let's have a look at this as well. So from wrapper, you can see our collection has this address, and then we have our fields. One, the address, which is representing the object. We have email, first name, last name, password, obviously all fields of the address as well. We have first line, second line, town, and postcode.